This closing keynote panel is comprised of some of the most prolific individuals and companies making massive strides in neuromodulation. Last year at the summit, we introduced our show to the concepts of neuromodulation, and there was so much audience interest. There was just so much audience interest. It's basically the technology treatment not enough people are talking about. Well, we're going to talk about it here and hope the information trickles down to the consumers that need it most. So I'd like to welcome this all-star panel to our stage, and I'll introduce you to Stephen Falowski from NANS, who will lead this discussion.
Okay. Well, thank you, and thank you all for coming today. We're going to cap this out with what I think is going to be a very impactful session. We do have a powerhouse team up here of some of the largest medical device companies in the world to showcase what we do. And I think it's staggering to see a lot of the statistics we've seen today at CES and just in the literature showing how much people suffer from chronic pain. When we were here last year to talk about what we do in our space, we focused on the opioid crisis and chronic pain. But one of the things we're going to do this year instead is also talk about how our devices not just tackle chronic pain. There's so many more indications that we are looking to tackle as well and are doing a very good job at. Things like Parkinson's disease, things like incontinence, stroke, epilepsy. These are all things that we treat with neuromodulation devices. So to put that into perspective, neuromodulation devices are devices that are neural interfaces. They're meant to stimulate nerves. We can put them anywhere in the body, from the brain, the spinal cord, peripheral nerves. And historically, for the last 30 to 50 years, we've implanted these devices, mostly on the spinal cord for chronic pain, but we've now moved into the smart technology space. We now have external devices. We have wearable devices. We're integrating our technology with how people live their daily lives. We're starting to integrate our technology with all the smart devices that are out there. So I am a functional neurosurgeon. So what that means is I specialize in implanting these devices on neural networks anywhere in the body. And I represent NANS, which is the North American Neuromodulation Society. I am the secretary on the board. North American Neuromodulation Society is a society that bridges the gap. And what that means is we bridge the gap between large medical device companies that can make these products and connect them with physicians and with patients who can implement them. We also have the job of educating, not just patients, but also physicians, and creating a multidisciplinary approach where they can all come together. So to put this into perspective, this is not just neurosurgeons like myself who are implanting these devices. There's also interventional pain physicians. There's also PMR or rehab physicians. There are psychologists who are involved in the taking care of these patients. These are the devices that we felt last year was some of the answers to the opioid crisis, but no one knew about it. And to put that into perspective, 80,000 people a year die because of the opioid crisis. We put in about 80,000 devices a year for chronic pain. So we are not even scratching the surface on the penetrance we could have to treat some of these disorders. So what I do also want to build up is that our technology has some of the highest success rates we've ever seen in healthcare. And yet we're still under-penetrating the market to take care of these patients. One, because of awareness, two, because of education, but also a fulfillment of factors that are just coming together that make it very hard for even medical devices to come to market. And that's why I think it's great that we have this powerhouse panel up here that can help us get an idea of, one, not only what are we doing, but what the future looks like, and even sometimes the challenges we have in getting these devices to market. I say it's very easy to get a smartwatch onto the market, but it's not very easy to get a spinal cord stimulator with an implantable device onto the market. And even external devices that we have, which can be implanted sometimes as easy as just a needle poke, meaning the same way you get a flu shot is the way we can implant small transmitters into your body to modulate neural networks. And that's where we have to get to with the future. So I'm actually going to open up with, we have Mike Moffitt here, who's a director of research and development for Boston Scientific. And one of the things that Boston Scientific has done is started looking at mapping neural pathways and how that can integrate into some of the technology we have. So, Michael.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Falowski. Like you said, we agree that neuromodulation is just at the tip of the iceberg. When you think about the brain and all the physiological functions that it controls, there's so much potential if we can just map it and interface with it appropriately. So to tell you a little bit about how we think about interfacing with the brain, we think of it as two key ingredients. The first ingredient is to talk to the right neurons. The neurons that, when engaged, will result in a therapeutic effect. And at the same time, to avoid the wrong neurons, right, that when stimulated are going to result in a side effect. And then the second ingredient is, once you're talking to the right neurons, is to tell them the right message. So if we can do that, we think, in addition to treating chronic pain and Parkinson's disease through spinal cord stimulation and deep brain stimulation like we are today, we can look at a whole host of other things. Since we're at CES, I thought it might be interesting to compare a little bit to the 8K fad and the 8K systems that are being flaunted, because we've worked really hard to take neuromodulation from standard def to high definition. And I thought I'd share a few things that we're doing to do that. So first, the legacy systems, and I should mention that spinal cord stimulation is not new. You know, the first patient that was implanted and then reported, that publication was from 1967. So we've been maturing this field for many, many decades. So the legacy systems, they would use things like 4-electrode or 8-electrode systems. Today, Boston offers a 32-electrode system. To get to high resolution, you've got to have more pixels. And the next thing that we've done is we've created custom electronics that control each of those electrodes independently, where the legacy approach was to gang them all together. Everything that's assigned it on is ganged together. Third, we worked on advanced algorithms that'll control each of those electrodes independently, so that the way a physician or a doctor, like Dr. Fulowski, looks at it is they just steer the therapy in sub-millimeter resolution, which is really important because the right neurons are in a tight neighborhood. And then fourth, most recently, a few years ago in the deep brain stimulation space, we launched the first commercial directional lead, which allows the users to now steer therapy not just in one dimension, but in 3 dimensions, again, in high resolution. So we're excited about all the things that we've done to talk to the right neurons. They've helped our therapies and helped our patients. Coming back briefly to that second ingredient of sharing the right message, once you are talking to the right neurons, you need to speak the language of the brain to get good therapy. And we affectionately call that speaking brainish. And so the last several years, the way that we've worked to do that is we have engaged in a lot of exploratory activity, pretty rigorous, and we've made a lot of progress, and we're doing things that we couldn't have even dreamt about a few years ago. But what we think is going to really move the needle, and that Dr. Fulowski alluded to, is this idea of connecting our systems to peripherals and apps and wearables that patients use. It's going to collect all sorts of data. And what that data is going to tell us is how the patient is responding when we send a specific message to the brain. And when you take that data and apply advanced analytic techniques, state-of-the-art analytic techniques, we believe it's going to teach us more about how to speak brainish and to open up neuromodulation better. So we're really excited to be in this space. We agree it's the tip of the iceberg, and we're just grateful to be able to contribute to it.
Okay. Well, thank you, Michael. He touched on this idea of connectivity, which I think is really important, because for the longest time in our space, we focused on the actual implantable portion of our therapy. And we focused a lot on making it minimally invasive, so it's safe for the patient. These procedures are done in less than an hour, where patients go home the same day. Recovery can be less than 1 to 2 weeks. For some of even the more invasive ones that we do. For the less invasive ones, it could be no recovery time at all. But we turned our focus on making these devices even better from that standpoint to connectivity, meaning how do we connect it with the patient? How do we connect it with the devices that are out there and actually look at things like functional outcomes? Which leads me to Ryan Lakin, who's the head of research and development for Abbott, which is a company that's working on that connectivity. So please, Ryan.
Yeah, so the future of managing both chronic pain and deep brain stimulation should really focus on how we address all aspects, I think, of those chronic conditions. Every day, that's something that we spend our time on at Abbott, and I'm sure my colleagues do the same at their companies as well. And as we hope to move forward in that space, we want to address the physical pain, but at the same time, really impacting the emotional aspects as well as the psychological burdens that come with these chronic conditions is absolutely critical. And so neuromodulation is the future. We've talked about that. We're committed to that. And we hope that you learn more about that today. And neuromodulation is really, as was said, is about restoring the natural language of the nervous system so that patients can really become people again, and those people can go do the things that they just fundamentally love to do. So I lead R&D. I'm a biomedical engineer. I've committed my whole career to medical devices. And at the end of the day, I love bringing new technologies to market and fundamentally just helping people. And there's a lot of people to help. There's about 50 million people in the United States that suffer from chronic pain. About another 11 million people suffer from movement disorders such as Parkinson's disease or essential tremor. So if you do just basic math, that's about 1 in 5, 20% of the US population at some point in time is suffering from one of these 3 chronic conditions. And these chronic conditions are serious. They're both physical and emotional. Many of these people have been suffering from pain for a long time. They maybe can't go to work. They may be depressed. They fundamentally can't do the things that they desire to do. So as we think about, here at CES and looking around, there's smart everything, right? We walk by smart beds. We see smart refrigerators. There's unbelievable massage chairs that are really smart now. But as we look at the technologies that are really, I think, impactful to our space, we think about just the vast number of sensors that will continually evolve, and combining those sensors with Abbott's life-changing technology, I think, is really what ultimately will create solutions that really change the lives on both the physical aspects as well as the emotional and psychological. For us, we call that the smart body. So we want there to be advancements in developing fundamentally the smart body. If we think about wearable sensors, back in 2014, only about 9% of people were using some type of wearable. Just 4 years later, it's up to about 33%. And I think as we continue to see advancements in technologies, reduction of cost, and better integration with healthcare technologies like Abbott and like my colleagues, I think you're going to continually see evolution of those. And ultimately, medical devices and life-changing technologies are things that just where places smartphones just can't go. And so we have to connect those solutions together. When you look at the devices like the ones we have and the ones at Abbott, they collect a vast amount of data. They collect data on aspects about the person themselves, as well as about how they use the therapy. And at Abbott, we're the only neuromodulation company that leverages Bluetooth connectivity to connect our implantable device with our consumer handheld, which opens up an unbelievable pathway of communication of data between an implanted device and kind of what everybody is used to using on a day-to-day basis. And so as we continue to move forward, we see how that can truly create personalized care for individuals. And so if we take that into kind of maybe an example I had the opportunity to have dinner with a veteran who had jumped out of airplanes for a long part of his career and then unfortunately had some additional challenges and had gone through chronic pain for probably about 10 years. And he wasn't that old, probably about my age. Hopefully you don't think I'm old. And but he was walking with a cane. I mean, disabled. He was really struggling. He got implanted with a dorsal root ganglia stimulator, and it fundamentally changed his life. He told me about when he went back to his family reunion that he hadn't seen family for a long time. He was up, walking straight, no cane. People didn't even recognize him. I mean, it truly is a technology that can bring you back to who you normally are. And it's just an example so that you can kind of picture the opportunities that exist of bringing consumer technologies and connecting them to technologies like the ones that we bring to market. At the end of the day, Abbott is committed to developing life-changing technologies and connected solutions. Over the last 5 years, we've spent about $9 billion in research and development to continually create new technologies. And I think in closing, as we think about the opportunities of coming to CES and seeing all these great technologies that are being developed and the people in this room and the people walking the halls, it's just a great opportunity to bring technologies together to fundamentally help people with Parkinson's disease, people with chronic pain, and other conditions, and really change their life and allow them to be who they desire to be and who they want to be. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Ryan. I think some of the topics you touched on are very important. One is to kind of give you the extent of what we can do with some of these devices. We're now implanting electrodes on the spinal cord that not only can treat pain, but we can now understand the neural networks enough that by stimulating the spinal cord, we can affect the psychological component of pain in different parts of the brain. That's how much we're starting to understand the neural networks. And what's interesting, though, is despite the fact that we've had cutting-edge technology for so many years, on the flip side, the way we determined whether a patient was doing well or not was extremely subjective. We would show them a little smiley faces on a piece of paper and say, well, how do you feel? And that's how we would judge how well our devices were working. And when you really think about it, that's not very objective. Right now, we're starting to look more at the idea of functional outcomes, psychological improvements, being more objective about it, which leads me to Matt Thomas, the Vice President of the Pain Divisions for Medtronic, a company who's actually working very tirelessly on objectivity for these devices.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Fulowski. I think one of the big breakthroughs that's going to come in neuromodulation for pain and for some of these other conditions is really around using objective measurements for two things. Number one is dosing. So neuromodulation is about applying electricity in a dose, but determining how much to do, especially when pain is subjective, is a challenge. And so one of the opportunities we see many companies pursuing and researchers are, how do you characterize that patient's condition to understand objectively how much energy to deliver, and then being able to measure an outcome as a result of that. And there are some great companies that have brought these technologies to market. Just earlier today, we announced an acquisition of a company that's been doing a decade of preclinical work to determine, using objective measures, how to dose spinal cord stimulation in a different way. So we think there's great breakthroughs that are going to come from everyone in this area, and that ultimately delivers what you just talked about in terms of that patient outcome, right? Better outcomes that are sustainable for these patients. But then, as you described, it's how do you characterize the result of it? It's not just the VAS score, the smiley face that we all see in the emergency room, but it's objectifying the results of it in terms of patient function, the ability to restore your life, as you both described. That's the outcome we're looking for, not just a measure which is highly subjective and perhaps not terribly useful. But being able to say, when someone has this particular condition, you dose the stimulation in the right way, this is the outcome that you can expect short-term and long-term. And so Medtronic really, as we think about these things, is applying, capturing objective measurements to characterize and determine the dose for stimulation. And that's not just in spinal cord stimulation, that's in what we've been doing in brain radio for deep brain stimulation, as well as how we miniaturize stimulation for peripheral nerves, like for pelvic health and incontinence. But it's also that standardized way to collect and measure outcomes so that we demonstrate to patients what those are, we demonstrate to payers, so we sustain and we preserve access to these important therapies over the long term. So we're excited about this future of stimulation for all these different targets, and recognize that part of the duty we have is, as leaders in this, is building measurements that create sustainability. And that's really, as we think about objective measures, both for dosing and outcomes, is a big part of the future for neuromodulation. Thanks.
That's fantastic, man. Thank you. I think it's a true sign to the future that's coming, is that not only are we going to give pain relief, but we'll have ability to objectify it. We'll be able to tell the patients, you're walking more, you're sleeping better. We can see that the impact this has on your life has changed. There's a lot of technology we have in these devices that can create diaries of how well the patients are doing. And when you think about chronic pain, so in the United States, chronic pain is more common than heart disease, cancer, and diabetes combined. All three. It's one of the most disabling ailments we treat in all of healthcare. And yet we have these amazing technologies that can treat it, and we're highly underpenetrated for the patients that we can take care of. But we are growing. We're expected to be a $7 billion industry. And we have here Dan Brownstein, president of the North America division for a company called Saluda, which is going to be potentially coming to the market soon with a new technology that's integrating the idea of smart technology into these devices, also to lead to objectifying pain relief. So, Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Fulowski, and thanks for having me here. It's obviously nice. We're the new guys on the block. We're just getting going. We have a few hundred patients that we've implanted, but the themes are almost exactly the same as what you guys have been talking about. The question that we ask internally at Saluda is like, why, when you look at only 80,000 implants that are done a year, but there's 23 million people with chronic pain, why is it that not more people either get the therapy or even know about the therapy? And I was talking about this earlier today. Is that I'm home with my mother-in-law. I've been in this space for now 13 years over a couple different products. And she didn't really understand what a pain management physician did, how to get interventional pain procedures. And you go right to surgery. I think most people know what surgery is. And so we're taking a look at like, how do we create that and build awareness around the therapy, and what are some of the limitations? And we've talked about the measurement and understanding, how, we speak brainish, we talk about it internally as we speak spine language. But we also understand what's coming back. So with our systems, a little bit different is that we stimulate the spinal cord. We actually measure real time 5 million times a day. We record that on our system. We store it all up in the cloud. So it becomes this like big data project. Like, how do we create a way to predict outcomes, to create better results, and ultimately deliver this therapy to more people? And I think that just recently we had we were very fortunate that and Dr. Fulowski was part of this manuscript that was published in Lancet Neurology. And neurologists have always been skeptical about neuromodulation. And there's a huge number of pain patients that are in that field, and there's a huge number that are in diabetes. And I know that everybody's working on diabetic neuropathy for pain. And so we think about how do we make this better. And I think it starts with understanding the mechanism of action of the therapy, and then delivering that for the patient. And that's what we're committed at with Saluda.
Fantastic. So one of the points I did want to touch on too on this panel is, I think in healthcare, we're starting to see that patients are driving their healthcare. And so a lot of that means that we have to get out there for education and awareness. But that also means patients are pushing what we do. And when I say pushing, I feel that patients are pushing us to better this technology. But patients are also pushing us to expand the indications. If I was here 10 years ago, the only thing I could have talked about was chronic pain. But now we're talking about Parkinson's disease and tremor and incontinence and stroke, and we're looking at depression and addiction. So we're starting to expand the indications. And I know this is something that Boston Scientific has been working on as well, Michael. So what are we looking at for indications for the future?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Fulowski. The neurological and psychological disorders are one of, if not the main contributor to long-term disability in our society. So once we're able to tap into the brain, and we're doing that now with movement disorders and some other indications, you start to think about a whole host of things that can be treated with the brain. In fact, the opportunities are almost daunting, and the need is greater than we think we could tackle alone. So our approach at Boston Scientific has really been to, in addition to doing the in-house research that we're doing, to form strategic partnerships and to help guide us. And there's a couple forms in which those strategic partnerships take shape. One, based on the high-resolution technology and so forth that I described previously, we've had many, many doctors and scientists approach us about using those platform capabilities to tackle new indications. Indications like spinal cord injury, epilepsy, Alzheimer's, dementias, depressions, lots and lots and lots of things. And so that's very exciting, and we formed those collaborations, and we're working together with them. In addition to that, we're forming strategic partnerships with companies that have particular capability or particular expertise where we think it can advantage us and help us get into new indications and help the patients in those spaces. Companies like BrainLab that are expert in visualization, companies like functional neuromodulation that already have a head start in treating Alzheimer's. So, and there's many others that our leadership will publicize when that's appropriate. So super exciting. These strategic partnerships are allowing us to put a lot of activity out there to see where most of the promise is and where we can help a lot of patients. But we're excited. Neuromodulation, we think, is primed to do that, to treat a lot of indications.
Yeah, I will say with neuromodulation, we're essentially getting to the root of the problem. Everything in your body is controlled by your neurons in your brain and your spinal cord. So for us, it's just a matter of figuring out how to stimulate it, what type of paradigm to use to stimulate, the parameters to use, and kind of how to attach ourselves in those neural networks. But I think with the expanding indications that we're seeing and the push we have, the drive we have to expand all these indications, objectivity becomes very important. And Matt, you touched on that for Medtronic and your goal with objectifying what we're doing. How do you see that affecting the future now, especially with all these indications we have coming?
Well, I think each of these indications, especially as we've talked about diabetic neuropathy, right? That's a different patient than someone who's had 2 or 3 back surgeries and they still have chronic pain. And so being able to pick up other measures that matter, not only to that patient, let's just stay with diabetes. I spent time in our diabetes business, but the physicians, those referring physicians, also have to have an understanding of how does this treatment affect the underlying condition I'm trying to manage. And without that, we're kind of speaking 2 different languages, and therefore the referrals won't get made, and there's not a virtuous cycle of, I know how to refer the patient, I know what to expect, and then that builds on itself. And so I think as we look at objective measures, it's expanding them to be relevant to that particular indication. So the evidence gets built the right way, the referring physician knows what to look for, and the referral pathways and then ultimately payers drive appropriate access for those patients. So again, that only comes with objective measures that are serious and quantifiable in ways that are necessary to build that base of evidence. So it's a huge step forward for us as we do things like you're suggesting, because it's so expansion to these 25, 50 million patients is predicated on building that set of patient-specific indications and measures.
I feel that if we're getting to the point that we can objectify these measures, have true functional outcomes with these patients, we have to get to a point where we're now integrating the technology that's here in the future for smart technology, connectivity, and somehow having that communicate back to the patient to change how we're treating them. And that's something you touched on, Ryan, this idea of connectivity. So here's more of a fun question. So being at CES, how do you see this affecting the future for what we do?
Yeah, so look, we're as I think someone said, we're just scratching the surface for what really the opportunity is. And I think when people think of medical devices, they think of these big clunky things that people carry around, and when you're sitting at the dinner table, you look across, you go, that person's definitely got a medical device, right? And I think the reality is, for people that have chronic conditions, you have to have them feel like managing their chronic condition is just part of their normal life, and it's easy for them. And that is going to be the capability and opportunity to do that is through leveraging consumer technologies. I mean, when it becomes just part of how you live and you're getting unique insights back, you're actually getting rewarded and positive reinforcement for when you're doing well. You're getting early indications when you maybe need to go see your physician. Your physician has the opportunity to better identify the best patients that can receive the therapy and receive good outcomes and maintain longevity of therapy. All those types of things I think are opportunities when we think about CES and how we can bring these two things together for connected solutions, kind of create this smart body idea. And that's really, I think, what's going to give the opportunity for more people to benefit from this technology, and for others who know those people to also realize the benefits that they can also gain similar relief. There's just a number of people we talk to that when they get positive relief, if it's a Parkinson's patient or if it's someone with chronic pain, how that cascade event of talking to their friends and loved ones just enables others to become more aware, just mostly because of the awareness just isn't what it needs to be, as Dr. Fulowski has stated.
So as we're getting close to the end, I'll tell a little story of the way I got involved and interested in neuromodulation was actually as a very young child. And I used to read books on artificial intelligence. And one of the key points of artificial intelligence, though, is kind of where we are now. And it's not even just a future, it's here now. This idea that technology can learn from itself. You know, previously, up until this point, all the technology we had was blindly stimulating nerves and just hoping for an outcome, but not knowing what was actually happening, not knowing how we changed the way the nerve was functioning, not knowing the chemical processes that were happening, not knowing the neural networks that were being affected. And Dan here from Saluda talked about this idea of closed-loop technology. So we're no longer just stimulating the spinal cord, we're also listening to what's happening after we stimulate. So Dan, is this like the advent of AI for what we do?
Absolutely. We're measuring 5 million data points a day on every single patient, and we're looking at that, we're collating it, and we're looking trying to figure out how to predict outcomes and individualize it for every single patient. So our goal is to understand before they even walk in the door for a pain treatment, whether they're going to respond to our therapy long term.
Fantastic. So as we come to a close, a couple last things that I will say is, so for the North American Neuromodulation Society, we have our meeting here in Vegas every year. It's going to be here in 2 weeks if anyone wants to come back and enjoy Vegas some more. I will tell you, representative of CES, NANS is a platform. So we do bridge that gap between medical device companies and physicians and patients, but we're also a platform for companies that are starting up, companies that are entering this space for healthcare in general. We run forums, emerging technology forums. We run what's called an iCube forum where we bring companies together. We try to help smaller companies get more involved and become bigger and actually enter the space because it is a very challenging space to enter. So hopefully you found this panel very impactful because it's a very powerful panel up here from these medical device companies. And hopefully we've built some awareness for what we do. And so thank you.